Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Vacharane Nirvishesha Srinivadi Kaskatyade Siddharane. So this is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, Sankhya Yoga, text number 13 and 14. Samam kaya shirogrivam daryanachalam stira samprekshya nasika gram swam tishashchanavalokayan prasantatma vigatabhir brahmachare vritestitaha manaksamyami manshito yukta sitamatraha. One should hold one's body, neck and head erect in a straight line and stare steadily at the tip of the nose. Thus, with an unagitated, subdued mind, devoid of fear, and completely free from sex life, one should meditate upon me within the heart and make me the ultimate goal of life. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The goal of life is to know Krishna, who is situated within the heart of every living being as Paramatma, the four-handed Vishnu form. The yoga process is practiced in order to discover and see this localized form of Vishnu, not for any other purpose. The localized Vishnu Murti is the plenary representation of Krishna dwelling within one's heart. One who has no program to realize this Vishnu Murti is uselessly engaged in Mach Yoga practice and certainly wasting his time. Krishna is the ultimate goal of life, and the Vishnu Murti situated in one's heart is the object of yoga practice. To realize this Vishnu Murti within the heart, one has to observe complete abstinence from sex life. Therefore, one has to leave home and live alone in a secluded place, remaining seated as mentioned above. One cannot enjoy sex life daily at home or elsewhere and attend a so-called yoga class and thus become a yogi. One has to practice controlling the mind and avoiding all kinds of sense gratification, of which sex life is the chief. In the rules of celibacy mentioned by the great sage Yajnavalkya, it is said, Karmana manasa vacha sarva vastasu sarvada sarvatra mituna tyago brahmacharyam prachakshite. The vow of brahmacharya is meant to help one completely abstain from sex indulgence in work, words, and mind at all times, under all circumstances, and in all places. No one can perform correct yoga practice through sex indulgence. Brahmacharya is taught, therefore, from childhood when one has no knowledge of sex life. Children at the age of 5 are sent to the Gurukul, or the place of the spiritual master, and the master trains the young boys in the strict discipline of becoming brahmacharis. Without such practice, no one can make advancement in any yoga, whether it be dhyana, jnana, or bhakti. One whoever follows the rules and regulations of married life, having a sexual relationship only with his wife, and that also under regulation, is called a brahmachari. Such a restrained householder brahmachari may be accepted in the bhakti school, but the jnana and dhyana schools do not even admit householder brahmacharis. They require complete abstinence without compromise. In the bhakti school, a householder brahmachari is allowed controlled sex life because the call to bhakti yoga is so powerful that one automatically loses sexual attraction to engage in the superior service to the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Visharan vinivartante nirarasideinam rasavarjam rasopyasya tram drishmani vartate. Whereas others are forced to restrain themselves from sense gratification A devotee of the Lord automatically refrains because of superior taste. Other than the devotee, no one has any information of that superior taste. Vigatabi, one cannot be fearless unless one is fully in Krishna consciousness. The conditioned soul is fearful due to his perverted memory, his forgetfulness of his eternal relation with Krishna. The Bhagavatam 11:2-37 says, Bhayam dvitiya binivesha taksyad isharabatasya viparyo smriti. Krishna consciousness is the only basis for fearlessness. Therefore, perfect practice is possible for a person who is Krishna conscious. And since the ultimate goal of yoga practice is to see the Lord within, a Krishna conscious person is already the best of all yogis. The principles of the yoga system mentioned herein are different from those of the popular so-called yoga societies. So the verse again. Samam kayo shiro grivam daryanachram stiram samprakstinasakakam swam tishaspranavalokam. It's chapter 6, text 13. Disha prasantatma vigatavir brahmacharya vitesitaha manaksamyamamashita yuktasitamapraha. One should hold one's body, neck, and head erect in a straight line and stare steadily at the tip of the nose. Thus, with an unagitated, subdued mind, devoid of fear, completely free from sex life, one should meditate upon me within the heart and make me the ultimate goal of life. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paskatyate Sitara. Prabhupada says that in the first 6 chapters, the living entity has been described as non-material spirit soul capable of elevating himself to self-realization by different kinds of yogas. At the end of the 6 chapters, clearly explain that the steady concentration of the mind upon Krishna, or in other words, Krishna consciousness, is the highest form of all yogas. By concentrating one's mind upon Krishna, one can know the absolute truth completely, but not otherwise. Impersonal Brahman realization, Paramatma realization are only partial understandings of the truth. So, still, here in the 6th chapter, we've come up to the understanding of Ashtanga Yoga. Ashtanga Yoga can only be practiced properly after one has gone through the stages of Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga. And Ashtanga Yoga is a path, also as the other yogas, leading ultimately to Krishna consciousness. Because by Ashtanga Yoga, if it's done properly, like we have examples of Somika Rishi, the father of Shringi, who was engaged in meditation Paramatma within his heart. And he was able to actually see Krishna within his heart. Similarly, Kardama Muni, the husband of Devahuti, the father of Kapila Muni, also practiced Ashtanga Yoga for 10,000 years, and he was able to see Krishna personally. Now, of course, we don't have 10,000 years, but Krishna is speaking Bhagavad Gita and spends at least 6 chapters explaining about Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Ashtanga Yoga in its relationships, in their relationships to Bhakti Yoga. So Karma Yoga, we should at least understand what it is in relationship to Bhakti Yoga. For instance, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Bhoktaram yaga tapasam sarvalokam yahishwaram suridam sarvabhutanam kyatvamam shanti richiti. So Krishna says he's the enjoyer, he's the controller, and he's the friend. And if we know those things, then we become peaceful. And of course, peace is the preliminary qualification become joyful or blissful. So the fact that Krishna is the controller means that he's the proprietor. Here in the material world, we're imagining ourselves to be controllers, just like Hiranyakashipu. He had enough intelligence to understand that unless he could prevent himself from dying, or his body from dying, because the soul doesn't die, but the body, obviously this body dies. So unless we can stop this body from changing, then there's no question of declaring ourselves to be the proprietor of anything. Because if we can't even control our own body, then how can we control anything else? Just like if you put your hand in a river that's flowing and you declare yourself that this water belongs to me. But what water belongs to you? The water has already left. Now you have in your hand some new water, but that's also leaving. So how can you claim yourself to be proprietor of anything in the lake? It's all flowing right past our hands. Similarly, this body that we have is always changing. And therefore, unless we could stop it from changing, how can we declare ourselves to be even the proprietor of our own body? If we can't control our own body, how can we claim it to be a proprietor? Just like if you get a dog, which I don't recommend, but say you did have a dog, and the dog never listened to you. Every day, as soon as it could, it just left your house and did whatever it wanted. Generally, it spent most of its time with your neighbor. And once every Janmashtami, the dog came by to see how you were doing. But you claim it's your dog. Although you never see the dog, you have no control over the dog. The dog doesn't think that you're actually its proprietor, but you're thinking in your mind that it's my dog. But it's just an imagination. You have no control over the dog. You have no influence over the dog. The dog doesn't think that you're a proprietor. So in this material world, we're imagining ourselves to be the proprietor of so many things, but we have no control over them directly. We're simply depending on Krishna, making arrangements through either his material energy or his spiritual energy for everything to happen in the material world. We have no direct influence on the activities that are carried out by material nature. Still, we're claiming ourselves to be proprietor. So when we start doing things as we're directed to do with the energies that we have, that's called karma yoga. Now, generally karma means that we're simply doing things dutifully according to the scripture, but not really understanding that everything belongs to Krishna. But when we understand that everything belongs to Krishna, and then we do our activities as Krishna wants us to do them, that's called karma yoga. And when we find out from Krishna's authorities why we're doing those activities, what the goal is, we may work dutifully. Generally speaking, when we're in the material energy, we have two problems. We have many problems, but two principal problems. One is that we're always in distress. And what is caused by, why are we in distress? Generally, we're in distress because our minds are unhappy. They're not satisfied. And why they're not satisfied? Because we're always hankering for what we don't have. And Krishna says, because of that hankering, it burns like fire and is never satisfied. Doesn't matter what we get, we always think, what's the next thing that I need? And we're lamenting over what we lose. That's the two activities in the material world that produce all the activities of materialists, namely hankering for what they don't have and lamenting over what they lose. or hankering to lose something, or lamenting of what they got. It's always a combination. As they say sometimes that in Kali Yuga, when materialists get together in their so-called love affairs, then it begins with courting, and then it winds up in court. So this is the problem. Generally speaking, people approach Krishna consciousness not out of love of God. It takes many, many years, if not lifetimes, to find out, to actually believe in God, to believe in the real God. Everyone has their idea of who God is. Generally, for an ordinary person, the Beatles are manifestations of God, or some famous actor or actress. And they have their goddesses, the actresses that are known to be attractive, and their actors who are known to be attractive. So people, and then when we come to Krishna consciousness, the only thing we really know about God, that we believe in God, is that he can take away my distress. That's all we're interested in. If he can solve my problems, so be it. I'm willing to chant a few rounds if that's what happens. If I can give a donation, just like there was one man, devotee, quote devotee, he used to come to the Laguna Beach Temple in California. He was a drug dealer. And his idea was, if I give a good donation, big donation at that time, to Krishna, then the result will be that we're partners in this crime. And if Krishna is God, then surely, since we're partners, he's going to make sure I don't get caught. Because if I get caught, he gets caught. So this was his idea, that God and myself, we make a deal, I give him some donation, and he keeps quiet. He's my protector. Unfortunately, he got caught. And then they blamed it on Krishna, that he was a devotee of Krishna, and therefore all the Hare Krishnas are all drug dealers. But actually, Krishna didn't need his money. And it was only for whatever benefit he got from giving the money, that was his benefit. Because one day, Prabhupada was giving class, and someone asked the question, and he said, Swamiji, I have to make a confession to you. This is 1960s. And Prabhupada said, yes, tell me what you want, what confession you want to make. So the man said, I'm a drug dealer. So Prabhupada said, well, what's wrong with that? I was a drug dealer too. Because in Prabhupada's household life, that's what he did. He sold drugs. He was a pharmacist. But Prabhupada didn't quite understand at that time what a drug dealer in the United States meant. It didn't necessarily meant a pharmacist. In any case, people approach God out of distress, like Gajendra. He was in a lot of distress, and therefore he prayed to Krishna to come and help him, although he didn't know who Krishna was. But still, he knew that there was something behind the material creation, supreme, who could he's the only one who could actually help him, or the best person to help him. And therefore, in the midst of his distress, he took a lotus flower from the lake and held it in his trunk up to the Supreme, whoever that might be. But Brahma, Lord Shiva, they knew that they weren't the Supreme, and therefore they didn't do anything. But Vishnu came and saved Gajendra. So similarly, by good fortune, Prabhupada used to say, most of us from the Western world, we don't know anything. We didn't know anything before we came to Krishna consciousness. We knew everything we knew was wrong. The things we were most convinced about were absolutely incorrect. And therefore, when we heard that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we accepted it for the most part, although we didn't know what really it meant. But we had no problem thinking, well, why should Krishna be God? Why isn't Shiva God? Why isn't Brahma God? Why isn't Ganesh God? Why isn't Durga God? Why, of course, some of us, we used to think we were God. But the material nature is so kind that after kicking us sufficiently, we got the realization that maybe there was a better God than I am. In any case, we weren't so mixed up praying to Shiva or Brahma or Durga. We accepted Krishna, whoever he might be. And after some months or years, we hear he's a cowherd boy and he herds cows. And we think, well, that's nice, whatever that means. But he's also the supreme controller in this world, and therefore he can help us get free from distress if we chant Hare Krishna. Of course, we may not realize at first what the cause of our distress is, namely lust, anger, and greed. Now, that starts out according to Krishna and Bhagavad Gita, Dhyayate Vishayam Pumsam, Sangaste Shupajayate, Sangas Sanjayate Kama, Kama Krodha Vijayate. It starts off by not knowing what the truth is. Now, 99.99% of the people in this world have no idea what reality is. They think, according to Bhagavad Gita, that the purpose of life is to satisfy the senses. And that goes on until the end of life. As I gave the example many times, as Prabhupada gave the example, that Akbar, a very prominent emperor in India at one time, he asked his minister one day, until what stage of life does the man maintain sex desire? So his minister said, until the end of life. So Akbar he said, that's not possible. How can a man who's about to die still have sex desire? So the minister said, don't worry, I'll prove it to you. So one day the minister ran in to the Akbar's chamber and said, Your Majesty, come with me and bring your beautiful daughter, the princess. So Akbar and the beautiful princess and the minister went to a man's room who was dying, was just about to die. And when the emperor and Akbar walked in, the man paid no attention. But then when the beautiful princess walked into the room, the man stood up, winked at the princess, and then died. So Akbar was convinced that it's true, that one has material desire even until the time of death. Because, as it explains in the verse we read, Visha Nivani Vartante, Nirha Rasudehinam, Rasavarjam Rasopyasya, Param Drishma Nivartate. That unless we can get the higher taste of meditation on Krishna, now when we say meditation on Krishna, could it mean like the yogis who are constantly meditating upon Krishna within the heart as Paramatma? Now, this is not very practical for this age. One time in Vrindavan, Prabhupada told the devotees there, because if you've been to Vrindavan, you know we have a Gurukul there. Right now, the Gurukul, I think it's still there. It's not in such good shape. It used to be, when it was new, it was in much better condition than it is now. But there were many rooms at that time. not as many students as there were for some time. So Prabhupada said, in one of the rooms, we should lay a kusha grass on the ground and cover it with a deer skin and a soft cloth. And then we should invite people to come and sit on the cloth and look at their nose and practice yoga. That was Prabhupada's version of the yoga system. Of course, I don't know of anyone who took Prabhupada up on that yoga system. Generally, people think that putting your leg behind your neck is, you're almost in Vaikuntha if you can do that. But the actual yoga system is made in such a way as to concentrate the mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But why is the difficulty in concentrating the mind upon God, Paramatma? Because people are distracted. Why are they distracted? Because they believe that they're their body. They have full faith in their body and things in relation to their body, namely to protect them. We have society, friendship, and love, partly because we want to serve and partly because we want to be served. We serve others in the material world mainly by helping them stay alive. As Shukadeva Goswami told Parikshit Maharaj, Deha Patya Kalatradishu Atma Saneshva Satsapi Tesham Pramato Nidanam Pashanapina Pashyati. That our main business in the material world is just to survive. After all, if we don't survive, there's nothing else we're going to do in this body. And the material world means a struggle to survive. Just like, unless we get something to eat, we don't survive after some time. We can fast, like yesterday, at least here was Nilajal Ekadasi. Generally, it's social acceptance or socially accepted in ISKCON nowadays that you're supposed to fast on Nilajal Ekadasi. Anyone fast on Nilajal Ekadasi? Anyhow, some devotees used to say that they strictly followed every Ekadasi Niljal. Although they had 3 big feasts every Ekadasi, they never took a drop of water, and therefore it was Niljal, without water. But generally speaking, we fast on Ekadasi, but we're not going to fast every day and survive. Therefore, we need food. But most of us have to pay for food. We don't put up our hands and the food drops from the sky. So we have to go and pay for the food. In order to pay for the food, we have to work. So we're not usually working out of love for our job. We're working out of love for the fact that we want our body to survive by eating something. Or we want a roof over our house, or over our head, so that if you're living in Philadelphia or whatever in Pennsylvania, when it's snowing outside, you don't get buried. People don't walk by and think you're the snowman. So we need a roof over our heads. So why are we working? Why are we doing things? Because we wanted this body to last for as long as possible, so that at least we can eat a little prasadam before we leave this body, in between, so we can eat as much prasadam as we can and make as much advancement eating prasadam before we leave this body as possible. For a devotee, but generally speaking, people, as the first words I learned in French when I was in school, that it's better that one should not live to eat, but one should eat to live. So people do both. They eat to live and they live to eat. Now, if the goal of life is simply to survive, then of course, any way we can do that will be considered to be valid. But karma yoga means they have some idea that food doesn't come from the supermarket, that food comes from sacrifice. Because ultimately, Krishna says, anad bhavati bhutani, that all living entities subsist on food grains. That ana means all kinds of food, doesn't just mean grains, but it means food. Sometimes in Ekadasi, when we say the prayer, Sharira Avijayal, Jotendriya Tayakal, Shilafali Sai Sagrit. Then we have the word ana, and some devotees believe you're breaking Ekadasi by saying ana, food grains. You're not allowed to say the prayer because you're breaking Ekadasi. If that was the worst offense we ever made, we'd be back to guided already. But there's no offense of saying ana on Ekadasi, unless you're so powerful that when you say ana, food grains manifest themselves and you eat them. Just like if you say intoxication doesn't mean that you've taken intoxication. In any case, food grains come from rain. Milk doesn't come from a carton in the store, nor does bread. It comes from rain. Without rain, there is no grain. Nothing grows without rain. Practical experiment to see if Krishna was right. Then try to put a little flour in a pot and don't give it any water and see how much it grows. Even a cactus in the desert, it has the ability to take water out of the air. And therefore, because it can drink water out of the air, there's even a machine that you could buy, which might be useful sometime, where it actually takes the water out of the air. There's a lot of water in the air. And so it takes the water out of the air, and you can get gallons of water just by using that machine, just out of the air. You don't need a faucet, you don't need a lake. Of course, you need electricity to run the machine, which might be a problem sometimes. But anyhow, it can take water out of the air. So food grains come from rain or water, and rain comes from sacrifice, from the clouds. Although modern society doesn't believe that there is a controller behind the rain, namely Indra and his assistants, still, we can see in modern society that they don't believe in paying Indra or the demigods or the Supreme Lord any sacrifice. Therefore, we find so much disturbance in modern society. Sometimes they say it's global warming. Sometimes they said it was global freezing or climate change. But actually, it's simply people's minds are always changing to the wrong things. Instead of performing sacrifice to the Supreme Lord and his representatives, they simply try to feed their empty stomach without understanding where the food's going to come from. And sacrifice is born of prescribed duties. So sacrifice doesn't mean that the only person performing a sacrifice is the person throwing the grains into the fire or chanting some mantra. That everyone in the Vedic culture had their service to do, their prescribed duty, and they all aided the sacrifice. They were all thinking, I'm doing this to sacrifice for Vishnu. There were no distractions in the Vedic culture, or very little. And therefore, the person who grew the food grains, who fed the cow, who got the milk, knew that a certain percentage of this milk will be turned into ghee, and that ghee will be given to the kings, who will utilize it, who will give it to the Brahmins, utilize it in sacrifice for Vishnu. The Kshatriya kings, they knew that without sacrifice, without serving the Brahmins, without the Brahmins in their sacrifice, then the rain wouldn't come. And if the rain wouldn't come, the citizens wouldn't be very happy. And if there are enough unhappy citizens, I'm going to be very unhappy also. Therefore, everyone from the Shudra to the Vaishya to the Kshatriya to the Brahmin, they're all engaged in sacrifice for Vishnu. And therefore, by sacrificing for Vishnu, doing their duty for Vishnu, rain would come, people would actually have good food, the air would be pure, the water would be pure, the relationships would be pure. People were not agitated in mind, they weren't in anxiety and fear so much. They were actually quite peaceful and happy because everything they needed was supplied. And there was no need for illegal activities for the most part, because people were completely engaged in sacrifice for Vishnu, and therefore they felt some higher experience. Now, we ourselves are also engaged in karma yoga, but that means sadhana bhakti. And hopefully, now that we have mostly householders living on the outside, hopefully we have a program of sadhana bhakti in our houses, and we're chanting Hare Krishna with our family or individually. We're hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and we should have some deity, either a picture or some Gaur-Nitai deities, and we should serve them and identify ourselves as their servant and our house as their house, and we're simply servants in their house. And if we work at a job, then we take some of that money, as Rupa Goswami did, to maintain ourselves nicely so we can maintain our consciousness and Krishna consciousness peacefully, maintain our house and our future, whatever is necessary, and at the same time give some donation to spreading Krishna consciousness as much as reasonable as possible. That way our work becomes karma yoga. Now, when one executes karma yoga for some time, one will feel that maybe there's something more. After all, Srila Prabhupada wrote all these books. As Prabhupada used to say, he didn't write them just for selling. He wrote them so we can read them, so we can discover what the purpose of life is, what the goal of life is. The problem with the books, for the most part, especially the books that we should read, like Bhagavad Gita, Nectar of Devotion, is that they're too simple. And we can't understand things that are too simple because we can't concentrate so much. And therefore we imagine that they're so complicated, but they're very simple. But what's complicated is our inability to concentrate. Therefore, sometimes we have to read the same thing over and over again and see if we can recite what we read so we can accept how simple it is. And when we get some realization, for instance, Krishna says, Atmo pamyena sarvatra samam pashiti sa arjuna sakambariya dukam sa yogi paramomataha. That he is a true yogi who sees the true equality of all living entities, both in their happiness and distress. So as mentioned in this verse, everyone has Paramatma in their heart. Everyone has the super soul within their heart. And the super soul, he's like, as it says in the Bhagavatam, Nigama Kalpataro Galitam Phalam. He's like a desire tree. Whatever we ask of him, according to what we deserve, Krishna will give us. If we want sincerely, especially if we have bad association, to do something wrong, something sinful, Krishna will actually provide us with all the opportunities to do that. If we want to go back to the spiritual world, Krishna will also give us the intelligence how to do that, and the proper association, the proper training. We want to go to the heavenly planets, Krishna will also give us such opportunities. Whatever we want, Krishna will help us because he's the super soul. Generally speaking, due to our association, that's what we really want. Now, of course, we're hearing about Krishna consciousness, and that means that we actually want to understand something about Krishna. But most people in this world, they're not, as far as I can see, yes, we only have 27 participants, so it's not most of the people in the world. They're not listening to the Bhagavatam class right now, or the Bhagavad Gita class. They're turning on to the news to finding out how much gasoline costs, whether or not they're going to get any food tomorrow. That's all they're worried about. They're not worried about what's going to happen to them after they leave this body. If you tell the people, actually, it's more important what's going to happen to you after you leave this body than what the price of gasoline is, they'll think that you're crazy. You have no idea of reality. Therefore, most people don't want to hear about Krishna consciousness. They don't want to make plans for their eternal future. They're making plans to what kind of car they're going to buy and if it can save on gasoline or not. And if they can do that, they think they're safe. If they can go buy a car that runs on air, they think that their life is successful, they're safe. God has protected them. But real knowledge means to understand who we actually are and what the process of elevating our consciousness from one stage to the next. So in the beginning, like a general, we were trying to get out of distress, and we pray to God for that. And then when we're out of distress, then we develop good habits. We eat prasadam. And then after some years or decades, we learn how to chew the food. And we actually even do that once in a while. We chew our food. We even think about, we try to cook nicely and chew our food. We go to places where there's fresh air. We try to avoid disturbing situations, like watching the news too much. So we try to live a peaceful life so that we can actually think about Krishna. And lo and behold, if one avoids all the different distractions in the material world and tries to accept that real happiness in the material world, at least, comes from nice food that's properly eaten and digested, from clean air, fresh water, clean water, from nice relationships with others, which is a big thing. We think that, sometimes we think is in the beginning that my problem is that no one surrenders to me. Not everyone accepts me as the savior of ISKCON. Even people sometimes have the ill fortune of offending me. But I don't realize that actually I have an opportunity in a relationship with everyone, as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has told us, to try to see how we can engage them in Krishna's service, if possible. How we can help them in their service to Krishna. That's our relationship with others. The gopis, they're not thinking, what can I get from Srimati Radharani? They're thinking how I can serve her. And even Srimati Radharani is not thinking, now today I'm going to see Krishna. Now he's God. Now I really need a new sari. And if I'm really nice to him, maybe I'll get one. No, she only thinks about how to please Krishna and nothing else. And even if she doesn't get a new sari, still she tries to please Krishna anyway, because she has no desire for anything but Krishna's pleasure. So when we understand that, then all our relationships become sweet, because we won't expect anything from anyone. We can only expect that Krishna will give me the intelligence how I can serve everyone nicely. And when we get higher knowledge, when we actually come to the platform of understanding what my ultimate goal of life is, then we become curious. And every part of the knowledge that can help me become more steady and more enthusiastic in my devotional service becomes valuable. So that's called Jnana Yoga. And when one refines that Jnana Yoga, then eventually one is able to think about Krishna spontaneously. One is able to understand how everyone is actually Krishna's servant. And that, as Krishna said, as I pointed out, Atmopamyena Sarvata. Some people are in a better material position, undoubtedly. And some people are in an inferior material position. But these things are only temporary. Even Brahma, as it says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, that at one time we were all Brahmas. Some of us were Brahmas with 4 heads, maybe some of us were Brahmas with 10 million heads. But right now, we're not Brahma. Although when we were Brahma, we thought we were on top of the world. As a matter of fact, we were literally on top of the world when we were Brahma. But that didn't last forever. Actually, it says either Brahma or some highly placed demigod. And here we are now. Now, what's changed is our material position. Everyone has changed their material positions since time immemorial, but we're exactly the same. We never change at all. Everyone is exactly the same. So if we recognize that everyone is eternally the same, then we have to develop a nice relationship with everyone now. Because we might meet them in the spiritual world and have to live with them eternally. We might as well start having a nice relationship with everyone. So that kind of realization is called Jnana Yoga. That's called knowledge. That everyone's eternal and everyone has an eternal relation with Krishna. And I also have an eternal relation with Krishna. And my eternal relation with Krishna is to serve him through his representatives. And that service means to serve everyone, to help them become conscious of Krishna to the best of my ability. And when we're doing that, naturally we'll think about Krishna. Now, for the ordinary person like the yogi, who has determined that he has to revise his relation with Krishna, then he leaves home, goes to a secluded place, as described here, and does the appropriate mechanical process to think about Krishna. In other words, he simplifies his life completely. He doesn't go anywhere, practically speaking. He sits in one place, makes the appropriate arrangements so he can look at his nose. The goal is not to look at his nose or to stand on his head. The goal is to have as simple life as possible so that one can just think about Krishna, one is not distracted. Even putting a deer skin on the ground is, Prabhupada said, is because when you're in the jungle, then there are snakes and other lizards and things. But deer skin has a property, chemical property, that it keeps snakes and lizards and other animals away. So the yogi can sit there peacefully. And of course, in the jungle, at least in those days, there were tigers. So if he was always thinking, where is the tiger? Where is the tiger? Maybe a tiger is going to come, is going to eat me. Then one shouldn't practice yoga. One is not qualified to practice yoga if one is thinking about tigers, because at the end of his life, he'll become a tiger. All that meditation will simply result is that he'll transfer himself into the body of a tiger. So one has to have the confidence through karma yoga, through jnana yoga, that I made the best arrangements possible. I'm in the middle of the jungle. No one's going to send me any emails. I won't even get any visitors knocking on my door because I won't have a door. I don't have a telephone. I don't have a door. I don't have anything. All I do is hear, the only thing, and no one's watching me. I'm not being photographed. They're not making a YouTube video of me sitting in the jungle. I have no one to impress except for Krishna in my heart. Prabhupada demonstrated that also in practical terms when he was in New York in 1968, beginning of 67. Prabhupada was in 26 Second Avenue, and they told Prabhupada you could get a telephone. That way we can communicate with you. So Prabhupada said, all right. And within a couple of days, they got a telephone. So Prabhupada was very surprised. If you ever went to India in the 70s, then if you wanted to make a telephone call, then it usually took around a week or 3 or 4 days at least to get through, internationally especially. You'd call up the operator and you'd make a trunk call, or at least you reserve a call. And then 3 or 4 days later, the operator would call you back. And they tell you your call is already prepared and you can talk now. And if you paid extra, huge amount of money, within a half a day, you would be able to make an international call. So Prabhupada was quite surprised. Now, usually it takes, in India, it took, sometimes weeks or months to get a telephone in your house. And even then, you couldn't call internationally. You had to wait days before you could do that. So Prabhupada got the telephone. He was surprised it came within a couple of days. So efficient is America. And then one day, the next day, Prabhupada said, take the telephone out. Everybody was surprised. Why did Prabhupada want to take the telephone out? He said, last night, someone called me up at 12 o'clock at night and said, Swamiji, how are you? Prabhupada said, you're calling me up at 12 o'clock at night to ask me how I am. He said, so sorry, Prabhupada hung the phone up. So we think, oh, modern society, so many conveniences to distract us from the goal of life. Unless they're utilizing Krishna service, as Prabhupada writes in the purport there. So the point is that the yogis sit on this kusha grass and deer skin and soft cloth and they focus their mind upon Krishna. They avoid all distractions. They make their life as simple as possible. And that takes lifetimes of good habits in order to do that, not to be distracted. What to speak of our poor selves? We've been brought up since the beginning of life, how to get distracted from God consciousness. Still, by practice in the right way, suitable practice, and by detachment from our past habits, that one can take to the process of bhakti yoga and gradually become conscious of Krishna by utilizing whatever assets we've acquired and try to utilize them in Krishna's service. Then we can become perfect yogis, bhakti yogis. Although we don't have the background of dutiful activity, nor do we have we're not necessarily great philosophers, we're not great meditators, but if we're sincere, as Prabhupada said, and we hear from the right source with the right attitude, and then try to follow the instructions by utilizing our assets in Krishna's service, then gradually, by doing so, Krishna will be pleased and he'll appear within our memory in his forms. Then we'll be able to feel his presence. Then we'll be able to remember his qualities and his associates. And then spontaneously, these things will be everywhere we look. We'll see this world as a pastime of Krishna in order to save the conditioned souls and bring them back to the spiritual world. At the same time, we'll be able to remember Krishna's pastimes, either as he displayed them in Vrindavan 5,000 years ago, or in his pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, delivering the conditioned souls in Kali Yuga. In that way, we'll always be conscious of Krishna, in spite of the fact that we're living in a world which is meant to distract us from any thought of God consciousness. Therefore, we should have faith that everything that's going on is by the mercy of Krishna. And we should go on with our business of trying not to be distracted by so many allurements. And at the same time, try to hear and chant about Krishna joyfully, knowing that if we do so, our destination will be sublime, that we'll go back to the spiritual world, where we're living in a loving relation with Krishna and his devotees forever. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Itiseva Devi Dasi.
Hare Krishna, Gurudev. Gurudev, I have one question. So let's say some devotee, before coming to Krishna consciousness had some, bad habit. I don't know, maybe let's say was taking drugs, and now this devotee is practicing Krishna consciousness. It's been few years now, and sometimes the bad habits can come back or have the urge to do, and then by mistake this devotee has done, I don't know, drugs taken maybe 2-3 times, but is really repenting, is really repenting about the taking drugs, and he knows that this is not the right thing. So in this case, and ask forgiveness from the Lord, but it's like really struggling for that. But so in this case, the Lord will forgive him and see the good qualities in this person, because if this person is doing all other devotional activities but just having this weakness little bit, so will the Lord forgive him for this thing and see the good qualities in him?
Yeah, well, Krishna, he's expert. He's an expert, according to the nectar of devotion. He's an expert judge of time, place, and circumstance. So Krishna knows how sincere we are. So there's an offense against chanting the holy name called committing sin on the strength of chanting. But Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes in the Bhagavad Gita, in his commentary for the 9th chapter, the verse which says, Apichet Siddharacharo Bhajante Mamananya Bhak Sadoreva Samantavya Samyagvavasti Tohisa Shipram Bhavati Dharmatma Shadvik Shanti Nigachiti Kontya Pratijani Hi Name Bhakti Pranashiti. That even if one commits to the greatest sinful activity, Krishna says, if he's engaged in devotional service, he should be considered to be saintly. Quickly he becomes righteous and attains lasting peace. O son of Kunti, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes in his commentary that as long as we're engaged in the material world, then there are two activities, our external activities and the internal cultivation of Krishna consciousness. Sometimes they run parallel to each other, and sometimes they conflict with each other. So when there's some conflict, sometimes we get into difficulty. Still, even if there's some problems sometimes, if we're actually struggling to become Krishna conscious and we're actually repentant, such a devotee thinks that I'm the most fallen, I'm the most wretched of all Krishna's servants. Somehow or another, I have this bad habit, but still I'll go on with my devotional service despite and struggle to become Krishna conscious to the best I can. Pray for Krishna's forgiveness and his mercy. If we're sincere, then Krishna will forgive us. But if we take the attitude that the chanting of the holy name will eradicate whatever reaction I get from my sinful activity, therefore I can go on chanting Hare Krishna and performing sinful activities, then one is still considered to be a devotee, but not a very high-class devotee. One should be. Nor will one's sinful activities, they may be, or the sinful activities may be counteracted, but still the reaction for our such a mentality will be that we won't get any taste for the holy name. So it depends on sincerity. If we're sincere, Krishna will forgive us. And if we struggle, then eventually, as Prabhupada said, in the beginning, when we're trying to walk, a baby's trying to walk, then it may take a couple of steps and fall down. But the parents never tell the baby, oh, you foolish baby. As soon as I started to walk, I did it immediately. I wonder if you're really my child. No one in my family ever fell down. We always start to walk immediately whenever we try. So why don't you just give up? Stop trying to walk. You're a failure. But I'm only 3 months old. I'm only 9 months old. Still, it's not quite, you've lost the respect of our family. No, if a baby's trying to walk, he may fall down. He's expected to fall down. But if he keeps on trying, then eventually he'll not only walk, but he'll also dance in ecstasy. So if one is sincere in trying in devotional service and finds himself in difficulties sometimes, then of course, if one is sincere, then one should try to avoid the circumstances that put one into that difficulty. If you're living next to a brewery where they're giving out free beers every day, and you find yourself in difficulty because you're just allured by that beer that they're handing out for free to you, then maybe it's better off to move somewhere else for a while. So you won't have the temptation of being allured by the beer. You have to judge your ability and make suitable arrangements. If you find yourself, you never read the Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Gita, then why don't you put the Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Gita on your desk right in front of you? And maybe some unusual moment, you might pick it up and read it. If you put it in some closet that you can't even remember where it was, then it's very unlikely you'll ever read it. So if we're really sincere, we'll think about how I can arrange my life so that I'll actually engage in Krishna service and arrange my life in such ways to make it difficult not to engage in this service.
No.
Otherwise, if we keep on getting allured by the same things, and we don't make any changes in our life, then what can we expect? Maybe we want to be a victim all the time. And therefore we don't make these suitable arrangements. So if we don't want to be a victim, then we should make the arrangements so we're no longer a victim. The best we can. But in the meantime, if we're sometimes a victim, that will be excused if we're sincere and we're actually trying to make some improvement. Otherwise, if a baby tries to walk and he's 56 years old, he's still falling down, and he's 56, he never learned how to walk, then after a while, the parents may give up on him. First 40 years we tried, but after that, it's too much. Expect more from you.
Gurudev, like one more question. Sometimes like we have our karma and we are going through this and that, but let's say somebody has somebody living in an abusive environment, for example, and but then they have this karma to suffer because of some previous activity, and they're getting the result of that in this life. But they can change the karma now. They can move out of that place if they have the opportunity. So in this way we can also change the karma, right? Like we don't have to have that victim mentality.
Can you say that again? I was just reading one of the chat messages. Can you just repeat?
No, I'm saying that, let's say for example somebody has a karma of let's say somebody's in an abusive environment, and they are there because we have some previous karma to be given, like suffer in this life or get results in this life. So let's say the karma is there to suffer of that circumstances, but we can change our karma by not having the victim mentality. By, let's say, if I have the karma, okay, to be in that environment, let's say abusive environment, but then I can move out from there if I have the opportunity. So this way you can not have the victim mentality and move out and change the karma.
That's right. Tudami buddhi yogam tam. Krishna is in our heart. He can give us intelligence what to do to avoid problems. If every day you pick up a hammer and you hit your thumb with it as part of a ritual, and you're wondering why your thumb hurts every day, and someone comes along and says, why don't you stop hitting your thumb with a hammer? You say, hey, I never thought of that. Sounds like a good idea. I think I'll try it. And lo and behold, after some time, your thumb improves. It doesn't hurt anymore. So it's not rocket science, most of what our problems are, how to solve them. The question is whether we want to solve them, or we may not have such an opportunity. We may have to work towards that opportunity in some way. Pray to Krishna for the intelligence and ask other devotees, ask other wise people how to arrange our lives in such a way as to make it as easy as possible to become conscious of Krishna. So there's a message from Janarn to everyone. Jordan, Hare Krishna, everyone, I have one request. On the first time in the Zoom of Prahladananda Swami, but something horrible happened to one Mataji in Macedonia. Her son committed suicide this morning, so I would like to ask everyone to pray to Sri Krishna and Srila Prabhupada to be merciful to the soul. So everyone can put your hands together and we can chant Hare Krishna one time together for the soul. Everyone can put their hands together and pray. And repeat, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you all. Hare Krishna. Any other questions? Yes, Agnihotra.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj, thank you for lecture. Мата Жалавангалата, сможете перевести? Это так сложновато будет. Скажите, пожалуйста, вот на территории постсоветского пространства я часто там в лекциях или в проповедях слышу, что чтобы духовно прогрессировать, человек должен страдать. То есть, что духовный прогресс, параллельно с духовным прогрессом должны быть страдания. Скажите, пожалуйста, вот духовный прогресс – это равно страдание или духовный прогресс – это нормальная жизнь, где ты спокойно живешь, гармонично и так далее?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So I'm going to translate for you. So Agnihotra Prabhu made the statement that in the post-Soviet Union territories, it's often preached that the spiritual progress is only possible when we suffer. So they equate the suffering to the spiritual progress. Can the harmonious life be equivalent to making a spiritual progress, or we have to suffer and it has to be the impediment for us to move, in a spiritual life?
Well, I guess I've heard some things that were completely bogus before, but that's probably on the top of the list. Do we actually believe that in the spiritual world, people are suffering? And do we believe that in the spiritual world, they're not making spiritual progress because they're not suffering? All of us should be Mahabhagavats by now, considering how much suffering we go through. So suffering is not a very good, as Prabhupada said, in the Bhagavad Gita, if someone bothers to read it, and it's Prabhupada's purport, where he writes that actually suffering is not very good. We shouldn't arrange our lives in such a way as we can suffer as much as possible. That way we can make spiritual advancement. Suffering may be in the beginning and therefore we have to learn tolerance, but just suffering and tolerance doesn't mean we make spiritual advancement. When we focus our mind upon Krishna, both in happiness and in distress, that's when we make spiritual advancement. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Dukeshu vamanang manak sukeshu vigatas priha Vita raga vayakroda stiti dhiramuni uchite. One who's not disturbed in spite of the threefold miseries, one who's not elated when there is happiness, and is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is known as a sage of steady mind. So it's not that when we have happiness, we don't make spiritual advancement. But the difference is that when one is suffering in Krishna consciousness, he knows this is the result of one's past misdeeds, and that Krishna is minimizing the suffering. He's not maximizing it. Oh, my devotee, he's suffering a little bit. Let me maximize it so he can make as much advancement as possible. He only broke one leg. I think I'll break his other leg too. That way he'll make even more spiritual advance. Well, Krishna is trying to minimize the suffering so that while we're trying to tolerate the pain, we can also go on with some determination to serve Krishna and to please him, in spite of whatever inconvenience we may find ourselves under. And when one is in a very pleasant situation with a lot of opportunities, then one thinks that, let me utilize these opportunities, this favorable situation, to serve Krishna with even more determination. In that way, whether one is in happiness, material happiness, or material distress, one with full determination is always serving Krishna under all circumstances. We don't find that the Pandavas were always in distress, that Krishna was always putting them in distress. Distress was there due to their separation from Krishna. But the poison cake that Bhima was fed, and the being put into the house of lack, or being threatened by a man-eater in the jungle, or the war battle of Kurukshetra, or Draupadi being disrobed, was not a daily occurrence. They were in the forest for years, but they were always thinking about Krishna. They're always making spiritual advancement. They didn't have any problems, generally speaking, in the forest, but still they were fully Krishna conscious. They were making spiritual advancement. So we actually want to avoid suffering. We want to find out where I'm pounding my thumb with the hammer and stop doing it. Because it's we ourselves, we're the ones who cause the suffering. Krishna is not making arrangements for our suffering so we can make spiritual advancement. It's coming due to our own past misdeeds. So we can stop doing misdeeds, then probably our suffering will then be minimized also. Otherwise, whenever the feast is there, we should eat twice as much as we can digest. And that will be a great opportunity to advance spiritually as we suffer. And all these other devotees who are not serious, they only eat what they can digest. They have no opportunity to advance because they feel good. They're actually happy after they take prasadam. Anything else?
Guru Maharaj, one question in Zoom chat.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Guru Maharaj, for your answer.
I have a question. How can I understand that after doing something or while doing something that I do for Krishna, but not for my own aim? I ask because my mind is very cunning and it's always searching pleasure for himself. Thank you very much. Yeah, well, we are made out of Sat Chit Ananda Vigraha. That's what we're made out of. We're made out of pleasure. We're in quite an abnormal situation right now. We're looking for pleasure when we're actually made out of pleasure. It's like if you're made out of sugar and you have a hankering for sugar. Doesn't make any sense. You're made out of sugar. Not that you should eat your nails, but anyhow. Generally speaking, we're made out of bliss. But we're looking for bliss just in the wrong place, that's all. If you're looking for sugar, you should go to the Pujari department and get some Maha sweets. You don't go to the place where they're throwing the wood into the stove for the heater. So if we're looking for pleasure because that's our nature, is to enjoy pleasure. And if we look for it in the right place, lo and behold, we'll find it there. If we look for happiness in devotional service and Krishna consciousness, that's where it is, because that's what we want. That's what everyone wants eternally. You think Krishna is arranging his pastimes so he can suffer? He's making arrangements for pastimes so he can enjoy. But he enjoys the most by pleasing others, by serving others. And all the devotees, they enjoy more by pleasing the others and pleasing Krishna than they enjoy by trying to please themselves. But our problem right now is we're trying to please something that's not ourselves, and therefore we're suffering. But if we actually try to please our real selves and understand that our real interest is in trying to please Krishna and his devotees, rather than this gross and subtle material bodies, then we'll get real pleasure and we'll be pleased. We'll actually become happy and blissful. And then we'll become so happy and blissful, after some time, we won't worry about being happy and blissful. We'll just be concerned, great, come in. We'll get the greatest pleasure through our own loving service to others, to Krishna and his devotees. Our loving service will give us the greatest pleasure. So we won't have to think about our own pleasure, because that's automatically there in loving service to Krishna and his devotees. Okay.
Guru Maharaj, short question from Nadia Devidasi in chat, sorry. Матажалангова, вы переведете?
Да. Guru Maharaj, please tell us how to properly fast on Ekadashi for the devotees who has a problem with the gallbladder. Yesterday I was fasting just with water, but by the end of the day, I was not feeling well, and I had a bitter taste in my mouth.
Well, that's not as bad as some of the stories I know. I know one devotee, he was very austere. He decided Nilgala Ekadasi. He fasted, this is the truth, I'm not making this up. He fasted the whole day Nilgala Ekadasi in the middle of summer in Vrindavan. And he decided to go on Govardhan Parikram in the middle of the hot blazing sun. And while he was walking around, he fainted and fell unconscious. What a fantastic Ekadasi. What a blissful way to remember Krishna when you're unconscious. So it takes some intelligence. The idea of Ekadasi is not to torture a body, a wicked body. I'm going to get even with you. You're eating every day, and now I'm going to get even with you. I'm going to fast and torture you. That way Krishna will be very happy with me, because I tortured my body. So the idea of Ekadasi is probably right, is so we eat less, and therefore our consciousness is perhaps a little bit less in our stomach and a little bit more in our brain, where we can hear and chant about Krishna. That's all. There's an opportunity when we're engaged in less eating, sleeping, etc., then we have more of an opportunity to engage in hearing and chanting about Krishna. But if we're following Ekadasi, Nilgala Ekadasi, and at the same time we're suffering and thinking about our suffering, then we're just wasting the opportunity of Ekadasi. When Ekadasi was first introduced, and it wasn't introduced immediately, Prabhupada knew his followers quite well. It wasn't introduced for years after Prabhupada. We found out about Ekadasi. And the devotees followed it according to the communication we got, sometimes quite strictly. And they were suffering. And they were every time there was Ekadasi coming up, devotees were fearful. Oh my God, there's another Ekadasi. I'm going to be tortured. I was supposed to fast the whole day, so austere. My mind would go crazy. I even had, when I was a temple president, I even had devotees leave our temple, fearful of Ekadasi. They blew because they were afraid of Ekadasi. So when Prabhupada heard about that, then Prabhupada's reaction was, Ekadasi means feasting. So everyone became very enlivened. although he didn't eat any grains, everyone had really nice sumptuous prasadam on Ekadasi, and the movement went on and progressed. We didn't lose all the devotees. So of course, now we may make some adjustments, and we may try to become a little bit more austere in order to help our devotional service on those days. But the purpose is not to torture ourselves, it's to minimize our eating and sleeping, so it becomes easier to remember Govinda, that's all. So that should be our guideline. If we have to eat prasadam on Ekadasi, we should do that. We have to drink water, whatever, but we should spend some time hearing and chanting about Krishna also. Otherwise, we're just being foolish. We don't, Krishna doesn't want, there's no room for putting ourselves in a position that makes it extremely difficult to remember Krishna beyond our means. And keeping good health is part of that. We don't purposely put ourselves in a situation where our health becomes deteriorates in any way that it makes it very, very difficult to remember Krishna and perform devotional service. Thank you very much.